Okay, so how do you feel about a composting toilet as a concept? Is it something that you are excited about potentially about having, or is it one of those things where you go, never ever, not right for me, can't believe that it doesn't smell? Anyway, wherever you sit on that spectrum, I definitely sat on the side of uh, I'm not convinced that all the claims people make about their composting toilet is true. It must smell. And yet I went with a composting toilet without ever having tried one, without really knowing what it was like. So I'm going to talk to you about why I made that decision, despite my really strong skepticism. I'll tell you what toilet I went with, and then whether my reservations, to put it mildly, were true, and what it was really like to have a composting toilet. So I had two key reasons for going with a composting toilet. I have to backtrack a little bit in terms of timeline. I grew up in the Netherlands, which is a very wet country. I can't remember ever having had issues in the Netherlands with too little water when I grew up and in my early adulthood, and it's usually too much. So when I came to Australia, I very quickly discovered this is a very dry continent, and really drought is more the rule than the exception. And so very quickly became aware of the issues about not having enough water. The amount of time the whole country really spends on monitoring water dam levels. I've been exposed to quite severe drought measures where, you know, lots of water restrictions. And when I started thinking about my tiny house, one of the things that I was really concerned about was that I wanted to make my reliance on water as minimal as possible. And a very quick sort of, you know, calculation of how much water we just flush down the toilet is, if you know, we here have dual flush toilets, so you know you have a half flush, which is a lot less water than of course a normal flush. But even if I just flushed a half flush all the time, just me on my own, I would use about 7,000 liters of water a year just to flush the toilet. And of course, then that water goes somewhere that needs to be cleaned, and there's lots of chemicals used to clean that water. And so that was one reason, a very important reason for me to consider an option where I did not need to use precious water to flush the toilet. Now, the second reason was a lot more practical, and that was that to have a toilet that didn't require hooking up to the sewerage system would increase my chances of finding a parking spot. I don't know many landowners or property owners who in the backyard have a hookup for a normal flushing toilet, and so that would really make it more difficult to find a place where I could park the tiny. So despite the fact that I'd watched many videos about people in tiny houses who have composting toilets and cheerfully share with anybody watching that no, it doesn't smell, no, it's fantastic, really no smell whatsoever, I would always sort of go, that can't be right. Honestly, I had experience with the kind of composting toilets that you find in when we go on nature walks, bush walks, you know, the ones where you go into a little wooden hut. But even if it was a nicely built dwelling-ish, you know, the toilet was really, you know, you open the lid of the toilet, the smell would just hit you in the face, and there was a really big dump down a hole, and you know, it smells, right? So I wasn't convinced at all, and I was like, well, okay, I think it might not smell as much as those toilets, but I think it will smell a bit. Um, but I'll worry about that later. I'll worry about how to manage that once I start to use the toilet and get to know it a little better. So those were my two main reasons to go with a toilet that did not require water or hook up to the sewage. So then when you start looking at sort of waterless toilets, and that don't need to hook up to the sewage system, there's basically, I found three key main options. And the first one I was quite interested in, and that's an incinerator toilet. So it's a contained unit that sits inside your house, and when you've done the business, you press a button and inside there is it creates fire, and that burns up everything that is in the toilet, and then all you're left with is ash, and that ash can go outside because it's any you know, dangerous pathogens have been killed because of the heat. Now I really liked that concept, because it felt like it was a very minimal, you know, you end up with very minimal waste, and you can just put it in amongst plants and just outside. I had two concerns about it. One was about the fact that it produces fire, and high heat, and because it's completely inside the house, I was a bit uncomfortable about that, although I'm sure they're very safe and no risk of starting a fire, if you like, but I was still, I don't know. And the other part, which made the decision really easy not to go for an incinerator toilet, is that they're very expensive. I could not afford it, very simply put. So incinerator toilet, off the list. Then the second option is like a chemical toilet, like what you get in RVs and caravans that you can get for. And so the contained units, you know, your business is caught in a container. There's chemicals in that container, and then at regular times you need to empty that container in a place where you can empty out these toilets. And that, so the two concerns I had with that was, one, I don't like to use chemicals unnecessarily. And I try to be, you know, really have virtually no chemicals in as much as I can. And so that part of it I didn't feel comfortable with. But the second part was the hassle of, one, finding a place where I could dump the contents of my toilet, and then two, having to do that all the time, right? Putting it in the car, going to wherever I can dump it. I have no idea where that would be around me, and even if it's just close by, still the hassle of having to do that and then come back and do that over again, and I don't know how often you need to do that, and so that became a bit of a hassle. But the most off-putting for me was the use of chemicals. So that left me with composting toilets. And when you look at composting toilet, there's a few different options that you can go with, ranging from the DIY option, which is basically a bucket, to a manufactured composting toilet that does all sorts of things. So the DIY option I very quickly put aside for two reasons. One, I don't like the look of them. Most people build like a box around it, and I went, just don't like the way that looks. But also, after doing some research about composting toilets, I realized that one of the major contributors to smell is if you don't separate out the urine. So then I would have to find, I'm sure I could have found it, a how-to video of some sort of building your own urine diverted bucket solution to composting toilet. So that wasn't a worry. It seemed to me at the time like a very complicated thing. And the second part that's important is that there's something that removes the smell and the air out of the composting container. So some fan option. And again, I thought, I'm sure I can find instructions on how to do that, but I wasn't sure that at that point in time, because we're talking about really at the beginning of my design phase. I hadn't even started building anything yet, and starting to work on the inside of the tiny. With my limited DIY experience and skill set, I didn't think that I could work that out. I think I could now, but definitely not at the beginning. So okay, so the DIY bucket system, I went into the too hard basket, and I didn't like the look of it. So then the second option is a type of toilet where everything is contained sort of in the toilet unit, and then you just there's options with a diverter and with a fan. So for example, Nature's Head is a good example. It has a fan, and it has a little container at the front that collects the urine, and then at the back there's a container that catches the other business, and then you need to empty those out. And that kind of gave me the same concern as with a sort of a chemical toilet, or even if you have a DIY toilet. I just don't like the idea of walking through the house, no matter how small that distance is, with my little urine container or my little poop container to empty it out. I have been known to trip over my own feet, and I could just imagine, tripping, dropping the containers and the mess that could come with that. So I did not quite feel comfortable with that. So although it kind of had all the elements that I thought were important in a composting toilet, the fact that it's everything inside, is like, oh, okay, probably not such a good idea. And then the third is a type of composting toilet where basically the collection of everything is outside. So you have a bowl, a toilet, and there's basically a chute that everything goes down, and then there's urine that is diverted outside the house, and there is the other business is collected in a container, and then when the container is full, you switch over to an empty container, and that way, and you drain the urine into something. So, and then within that option, there's many different types. Some more expensive than others, obviously, and I looked at lots of different options there and went with the simplest version and the cheapest version of that toilet, which it's called a green loo. I've got the green loo 55, which means the containers are, I think, 55 liters in terms of volume. So it was one of the very first items I bought. Tiny was still not, I didn't even have the trailer yet. The tiny house builder hadn't built the trailer yet, hadn't started building yet, but I already had in my garage in the house my composting toilet. And it was the last thing I installed before moving in, because I'm good with IKEA flat pack instructions, and found the instructions for the composting toilet somewhat more challenging. And I had connected with someone in Western Australia, and she had installed the same composting toilet as well, and she was really kind enough to share with me the videos that she took of installing how her composting toilet was installed on the outside, because that was the you know, it was easy on the inside because it just needed a hole in the floor, which was a scary thing in itself, to cut a hole in your floor. But anyway, but yeah, how that was all set up outside was I couldn't work it out. So yeah, so that's the toilet I went with. It has a container outside. It sits under the house. And then from the container there's a fan that connects to a pipe that goes well above the house that sucks up the air, and there's a hose that diverts the urine, and I drain that into a very long drain at the back of the house with that it drains into just underground. Nowhere near water sources, nowhere near anything where human excrement should get to, if you like. Once I am in a place where I can start to grow some fruit trees, then I will actually drain it into the area with fruit trees, because fruit trees love the ammonia in urine. So you put it to good use. Right, so that's why I ended up with a composting toilet, and the one that I went with. So now the big question, does it smell? And when I first, a couple of weeks before I moved in, I had not installed the full composting toilet yet, but I had cut the hole in my floor. I put the toilet bowl I don't know what it is, toilet bowl, I don't know what it's called, on top, and I had not been able to install everything properly underneath the house, but the container sat underneath the poop chute, and so it went straight into the container, and I stayed in the tiny for a couple of nights, just to you know, be in the house for a couple of nights, bit of camping. Had no electricity, but you know, so I used the toilet because I had no access to no other toilet. And the first night didn't smell a thing, and so I was like, oh, okay, that's good. Sort of midday, second day, when I went to the toilet and opened the lid, I went, oh, okay, all right, this starts to smell like the composting toilets out in nature. So then I thought, no, that's because there is no, you know, urine diversion yet. There is no fan working. All of it is not connected up properly. So hold your horses. So then the week before we're going to move in, I actually connected the toilet properly, and then we moved in. And so I was with my daughter at the time. So there's two of us using the toilet, and every time I went to the bathroom, I would go, oh no, can't smell anything yet. Then open the lid, nope, okay, can't smell anything yet. So to my real surprise, I cannot tell you how surprised I was that it does not smell. In fact, the house that I lived in before, there was more smell, toilety smells than I ever get here. So that was really quite a surprise. And I still sometimes go, really? But so trust me, I didn't believe it when I started, but it definitely does not smell. Except, and that's for another video, in a few weeks I will make a video about the 3 times it did smell, and why I think it did smell, and what I sort of tried to do about it. But there's only been 3 instances when it did smell in the almost 2 years that I've been here. But that's a video for another time. Next week's video is about how I keep my tiny house cool in the Australian summer. So we can get fairly high temperatures here. Summer tends to be around 30 degrees Celsius on average most days, and a tiny house warms up very quickly. So I'll share with you some strategies that I use to make sure that it's a pleasant temperature, and what I do when we hit the really hot days, like 40 degrees and over. And that's next week. Thanks for watching.